Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new here, my name is Miranda and I am the Enchantress of Avalon. For today's video, we are going to be discussing another wintry fairy tale. My last video I was discussing Little Red Riding Hood, which I do view as a wintry fairy tale, and this time we're going to be discussing Snow White and Rose Red, which is definitely considered a wintertime tale, even though we actually see the evolution of all of the seasons throughout the tale. But the primary important actions do happen in winter, and it has a strong wintry association. Even the Snow White name has a wintry association. To be clear, this Snow White is not the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs Princess Snow White. That is a different Snow White, and just has the same name, but it's a different Snow White. Yes, there are two in fairy tale lore. So Snow White and Rose Red is at its core a tale of two sisters who live out in the woods with their mother, and it is collected in this book that I showed my last video. And actually the Snow White and Rose Red drawing is on the back of the book as well. It's very beautiful. Such a gorgeous book. Lucy Cavendish did an absolutely incredible job. I have finished it now. I hadn't finished it when I recorded my last video, but I have finished it. I absolutely adore her retellings of tales, and the 12 Tales actually her own story, but it's inspired by The Little Mermaid, and it's kind of an answer to The Little Mermaid. She explains that in her introduction to it. Incredible. Anyone who loves fairy tales and magic, great book. And it's also collected as one of the tales in my Snow Queen and Other Winter Tales fairy tale collection. Yes, I have a lot of fairy tale collections. I love fairy anything, so of course I have fairy tale collections. Okay. So, the story of these two sisters, they live alone in the woods with their mother. And their mother has basically raised them by herself. We don't really get a father figure in the story. So it's a little different than other fairy tales where an absent mother is often the, parent that we're lacking. In this fairy tale, it's an absent father. But he's never mentioned even. So their names actually come from these two gorgeous rose bushes that their mother cultivates in her garden. One of them is a white rose bush, one is a red rose bush. So that's why she names the daughters Snow White and Rose Red. And the names also reflect their personalities to a certain extent. Snow White is much more reserved and introverted and has a much more introspective nature. Rose Red is more fiery and passionate, and she loves to dance and sing, and she's very, very expressive on a physical level that Snow White necessarily isn't. So what is the plot of the story? Well, the basic plot of the story is that in one winter, they get a knock at their door, and it's a bear, and he can talk. And at first, they're very scared by the bear, but they realize he means them no harm, as they've lived out in the woods calmly and peacefully for many years, and they have a great respect for nature and for all of the animals in the woods and all of the fae beings around them. They have a lot of respect for them. So they, after initially being a bit frightened, they invite the bear in to warm himself by the fire, and they help him in many ways. And when he's to leave the next day, Snow White has already grown very attached to this bear and wants him to come back. And so he routinely visits them all throughout the winter, which, yes, unrealistic. Bears would be hibernating, but he's visiting them all throughout the winter. And essentially his hibernation time is spent at night in their home. He's developing a bond with all three of them, both of the sisters and the mother. But his bond with Snow White is special, and she's the one truly, truly attached to him. And she's the one that also misses him most when he leaves in the springtime, and they don't see him for a while. And then it's around this time that the girls start having encounters with this wicked dwarf. Yes, there's a dwarf in this one, And no, he's not the kindly dwarfs like in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He is an evil, wicked dwarf who, for whatever reason, is using his magic to antagonize and to harm. It's not really described within the tale. Lucy Cavendish, in her book, talks about maybe he's the last of his kind, and that's why he's so angry and bitter and is acting this way. She doesn't put it right into her tale, but she does explain it in the second half of the chapter, where she's talking about the meaning behind the tale. And I really like that, because I've always wondered exactly why this dwarf was so evil. So I liked her talking about it a bit. And the girls routinely have to like cut pieces of his beard off because he keeps getting himself stuck in situations. It happens 3 times. And in the power of that magical number 3 is representative there. And eventually he does try to attack them, to harm them. And the bear shows up again, and he attacks the dwarf to prevent him from harming Snow White and Rose Red. So we have this dwarf who is wicked and mean and trying to harm these 2 young girls for really no reason given at all. And they get saved by this bear, which should be an animal that they fear. And around the same time, they've also been seeing an eagle that Rose Red was very attracted to and wondering at this eagle and very interested in this eagle. They come to learn when the dwarf is killed that both the bear and the eagle start to change, and they transform from a bear and eagle form into 2 young men, 2 princes. They're brothers. It turns out they were cursed by this dwarf to change forms against their will. And that's why they seemed not quite animals. They seemed somewhere in between animal and human, because they were humans forcibly transformed into animals, which is also why, as a bear, he could still talk. And after all of this has happened, of course, the girls fall in love with these princes, and the princes fall in love with them in return, and they end up eventually marrying the princes, and them and their mothers move out of the woods and into the castle. And Lucy Cavendish does also talk about what happened to the dwarf's body, and I haven't read the original in a while. I don't think them burying the dwarf and all of her very descriptive imagery is quite used in the original. I believe they did bury the dwarf in the original, or someone did. He does get a respectful burial, even though he was an ill-willed being, which is actually a nice thing, and it shows how good the girls are. That this dwarf that had caused so much chaos and tried to kill them, they're still giving him a respectful end in some way, shape, or form. I did really thoroughly enjoy the way Lucy Cavendish retold the tale. It felt very, very similar to the original, but she did embellish upon it to really draw out the magical and mystical elements of the story and deepen into them. And, again, embrace some of the older origins that may have been at play within the tale, which was very, very fun. So, what else did I want to say? I'm just going to look at my notes for a second. Okay, so it is a tale of transformation and redemption, because both of the princes were transformed into these other beings, into animals. And Lucy Cavendish does go into the animal symbology of why a bear, why an eagle, and what that might mean. I do not have time in this video to really dig deep into the meaning behind that, but there is a reason for choosing those particular animals, and those animals also mesh well with the personalities of each of the sisters. Like, there's a reason that Snow White and the bear prince would be the ones to form a bond, and there's a reason why Rose Red and the eagle prince would form a bond of their own. And There's a possibility, especially in Lucy Cavendish's retelling, as she's a little bit more sympathetic towards the dwarf, even though he is wicked and he is evil. Possible redemption for the dwarf as she sees it in maybe a next life, where he will one day be reborn and not be so hateful and ill-willed towards other beings. Which, again, I like. I do like a good redemption for a villain, so that was very pleasant for me to read. The last thing I wanted to discuss a little bit is that in Once Upon a Time, which is a show I love, I've discussed it before, there is a best friendship between Snow White and Red Riding Hood. This directly mirrors the Snow White and Rose Red tale because, again, you still have these two characters, one representing this, Snow White purity and hope type of persona, and one representing this fiery, passionate persona of the red character. Instead of Rose Red, it's Red Riding Hood, but it's still entwined. And I think it was beautifully done. I remember the first time I watched the series having gotten to that point and seeing the episode where it flashes back to them meeting, and I was like, well, this is obviously a Snow White and Rose Red reference, and I think that is beautifully done. I like that even though they didn't choose to do Snow White and Rose Red as a tale, they're still acknowledging that there is another alternate version of Snow White, or an alternate character named Snow White, who is different, but we're getting that little bit of a mirror by having her become best friends with Red Riding Hood. I thought that was a really fun addition. So I have discussed all I needed to discuss here in this video. I hope you did enjoy it. If you have, please like, comment, subscribe, and check out my blog, whiteroseofavalon.life. I have tons more content there, and I'll link some blog posts in the description box below that might apply to this video. And I will also link my Discord server. It's always linked in the description box below. So if you'd like to join my Discord and chat with me about more subjects like this, please do. Have a very fantastic day, everyone. Bye now.